Morning, everyone. You know, to start off with, whenever you have flag officers that are briefing without slides, it's kind of like running with scissors, so you'll have to excuse me if I trip a few times here. And since I'm the first one out of the chocks this morning, I'll try to address this sort of at one level. I'm going to talk a little bit about QDR in general, and then we can talk some specific things about the Marine Corps. But I think that the intent of the Quadrennial Defense Review is not to have it, well, let's put it this way. I don't think that the intent of the QDR was to make it sort of like the ultimate fight game between the four services. And that too often is kind of how it evolves, because you start to compete for a small budget and or a part of the budget. I think, in fact, what we really ought to do is we need to kind of back away from this thing a little bit and take more of a strategic look across not just the whole of DoD, but as Kathleen said a little bit ago, across the whole of government. So what I'm going to do is talk to you about a couple of thematic things that I think are important for us in the QDR as a Department of Defense to talk about and to discuss. Now, the first thing is, I was interested to listen. I listened to part of the last panel, and we were talking about the think tanks in town and doing mini QDRs. I think right now the QDR is a cottage industry with a gross national product that's probably higher than Iceland right now. So I don't know that how much more we're going to be able to do with mini QDRs, but clearly everybody's got an opinion about the direction that the country ought to be going with regard to defense and about what the threat is, and so I suppose that's just a natural outcome. Since we are here at the Reserve Officers Association today, I wanted to give you just one quick stat about the Marine Corps Reserve. We have to date, as of this morning, 99% of the units in the Marine Corps Reserve have deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan. 99%. And the unit that did not deploy is an administrative unit that's in the reserves that does our finance stuff. I mean, that literally, now the people in that unit have, but the unit itself is not. So, and 61% of the individual reserves that we have in the Marine Corps this morning, 61% of them have combat experience over the last 5 years. So clearly, the reserve in the Marine Corps is very actively involved, as it is in the other services, and clearly is taking a great deal of the missions that we currently have in Afghanistan and Iraq. One of the things we talked about at the last panel was a little bit about the reserves, kind of at a strategic level, and how the reserve started and how the mobilization piece got intertwined in the 70s, so that the thought was you were going to mobilize the reserves if you went to war, so you were going to bring the country along with you. We found that didn't, in my opinion, happen quite the way we thought it might have happened in terms of having this national dialogue. But I do think that one of the things that is of interest here is when we talk about the amount of time that we can use the reserves, and the laws that we currently have and the policies that we currently have in DoD about how often we can use the reserves. One of the things that we might take a look at are the missions that we assign to the reserves. Now, for instance, we currently assign to the reserves missions that, I mean, we across the spectrum, but they tend to focus on areas that have to do with combat support and combat service support. One of the things that I would posture is, if, as you look at this uncertain future, you think down the road that what you're really going to be doing is you're going to be doing a lot more things that involve engagement, things that involve that the most likely thing you're going to encounter is on the lower end of the spectrum, on the irregular side of the spectrum, if you will. And it's only rarely, we seem to do it about every 15 years or so, we have a fairly large conventional fight, that you might ask yourself about the force structure that we have in the active and the reserve forces, and do in fact we have it right based on how you're going to use them. It's based on a lot of other things right now, but I just would ask you to kind of think about that. One of the other things that I think would be useful for us to try to get our hands around in the next QDR is the notion of deterrence. You know, for many years deterrence was easy enough. Deterrence had everything to do with nuclear weapons. We had so many, the Soviets had so many, the Chinese had so many, and we kind of had this mutual assured destruction theory that we were operating under, and it eventually became a treaty and kind of drove what we did. The threat